It's very jarring to see the back of your head in real time on a camera. I hope everybody has the opportunity to do that sometime. So folks are coming into the Zoom and you'll be seeing part of my head. Maybe I'll move it up a little bit. Hi folks, my name is Miles Smith. I'm the Executive Director of the Maine Broadband Coalition. I'm here in Waterville, Maine. I will turn the camera, but I'm not going to turn it until later because last time I did that, everything unplugged. So you will see the audience here in Waterville all gathered. And I want to thank everybody for joining us for the fourth-ish annual Maine Broadband Summit, sponsored by a number of our great sponsors, including Maine Connectivity Authority, including Great Works Internet, including GoNetspeed, including LCI Fiber, Axiom, and I'm going to forget the last three. Consolidated Communications, Norway Savings Bank, Machias Savings Bank, and I don't have it in front of me. So I'll make sure I credit them tomorrow. We are here at Saunas College in this beautiful campus, gathered here to talk about our statewide program to bring broadband to every Mainer. And I'll just say a couple words about Maine Broadband Coalition before I transition to talking about our guest speaker today. So Maine Broadband Coalition is a group of about 40 organizations. It includes nonprofits, includes healthcare, education, and internet service providers and technical experts who are all working together to bring broadband to every Mainer. And Maine Broadband Coalition's role in that is to be the voice of the community and the voice of all of these partners who would benefit from statewide broadband internet that benefits all of us. We have 8 guiding values that we use to guide our work, which includes information and basic education on what broadband would mean for all of us and what we need to contribute in order to achieve it for all Mainers. And it includes advocacy on policies that would benefit all Mainers, that would allow us to reach all Mainers with high quality internet. And finally, it involves working directly with communities who are trying to figure out a solution to their broadband future. What does it look like? How are we going to get everybody connected? What types of technology? What types of services are we going to need in order to have everybody in our community benefit from broadband? Our 8 guiding values are affordability and reliability, high quality broadband internet that reaches all Mainers. Number 2 is that geography and demographics should not limit your access to high quality internet. Number 3 is that success requires experimentation and learning from failures, innovating and being flexible. No one size fits all solutions will work for all of us. Number 4 is strong community leadership. That is a precondition to public investments. That means you at home, those of you who are volunteering to bring broadband to your town, you're going to need to be involved in order for this to be a success. Number 5 is that broadband speed in rural areas should be comparable to those in urban areas. Just because you live in a rural area doesn't mean you should be shortchanged in the broadband access that you have. 6 is that scarce public resources should be deployed effectively to build enduring investments that increase competition and encourage competition. This is very important. In Maine, most of us only have one choice of broadband internet provider, and it is important that we have competition. We know it's just a rule of economics that competition brings down prices and increases quality. Number 7 is that private companies do have an important role in running broadband networks. They are the experts, and we need to benefit from their experience and expertise. Number 8 is that market forces and private investment alone will not deliver universal broadband. We know this. We've been trying to get universal broadband to all Mainers, but the private sector alone has not solved this problem. That's why Congress has allocated $42 billion to solving this problem, and some of it is going to come to Maine. And that's why we are all here today and online to figure out how we can solve that problem. So today we are opening with a few words from Doug Dawson. Doug is a big star in the community-driven broadband space. He has worked in the telecom industry since 1978. both in consulting and in operations. He specializes in helping clients launch new broadband markets, develop new products, and finance new ventures. His firm CCG is the largest telecom consulting firm in the United States in terms of clients. And he also has a varied telecommunications practice, helping with engineering, regulatory issues, operation, and planning issues. Doug has a daily blog, which is at potsandpans.ccg.com, which covers a wide range of topics for broadband and related subjects. And when I joined this industry just a few short months ago and started learning what is going on, I found Doug's blog to be extremely helpful to me, and I'm sure he will be helpful to us. So I'm going to hand it over to you, Doug. You're going to have to give me a second to get you on the screen here in the room.
Am I there?
You are there. We can hear you.
All right, very good.
Take me a second to do it, but you can go ahead and get started while I put you on.
Very good. As he said, I'm Doug Dawson. I'm the president of CCG Consulting. We have over 1,200 clients. That includes 700 government entities. And so a whole lot of the folks that you're talking to, the rest are ISPs, like the folks operating in your state. When we first talked about what to chat about today, they asked me for topics, and I suggested that we talk about all the things that Maine is doing right. And while they were very hopeful that that was a true statement, I don't think they realized how far ahead Maine is of a lot of the other states. I work nationwide. I see what a whole lot of the states are doing, and you know, I can't rate all the states from 1 to 50, but I would definitely put you guys somewhere in the middle of the top 10. So you're doing it right. Some of the states that are doing a little better, and you would rate higher because they've decided to almost completely fund broadband without even worrying about the federal BEAD money. So a few states like North Carolina and Virginia have put up huge amounts of money already. Here what the state gave over $1 billion to solve the rural issue. But there's a whole lot of things that Maine is doing right. So let's just sort of run through that list and talk about it. Some of them were pre-existing conditions in the state that really have nothing to do with the current effort to get broadband, but they're just factors that really made a real importance here, I think. One of the unique things you have is that the Island Institute has been out helping communities for a number of years, talk about the issue, learn about the issue, and I can't tell you how unique that is. I can only think of 2 or 3 other states where there's an organization who meets with communities like that. And so that does not happen in most states. Now, they originally were only doing it for their members who are sort of along the seacoast, but that torch has been picked up by the Broadband Coalition to bring all the other communities in. Believe me, that is a unique thing. And the states that do it, and I've worked with some of the communities and some of the other states as part of those projects, and it's really needed work to answer everybody's questions and to help them figure out what's needed and help them to plan. So big kudos on that. Another thing is you're very lucky. You have several really highly qualified, talented fiber overbuilders. You would be surprised how many parts of the country don't have anybody like that. And so it's really hard to talk about bringing an ISP solution when you don't have any ISPs. I work a lot in West Virginia. I was born in West Virginia. There's Frontier, the ILEC, and there's like 2 ISPs in the whole state. I mean, there's just nobody there who's even talking about going after the grant funding. So that makes it a real challenge. And so you have some very, very qualified companies. I think that's going to really help you to find the solutions. I also think it's interesting because he just mentioned it, that one of the sponsors here is one of the incumbents. I think that the fact that the state has embraced the incumbents is important because they're obviously a big part of the solution. And so I think that's something that you have that a lot of states are really wrestling with. You're also very lucky in that Maine did not get plastered with really, use the right word, crappy RDOF awards that really sort of messed up the broadband map. And so that's just a matter of luck that didn't happen there the way it did in other states. So I won't talk a whole lot about that since that's not a problem here, but that really has made it difficult to find solutions for the rest of the map in states where that turned out to be an issue. Now to talk about more specific things that the state has done and that local governments have done. First off, I think it's really important that even though the grants were very tiny, that you historically had a broadband grant program. And the reason for that is the state got to know all the ISPs. When the BEAD money came out, I would say half of the states had no idea who the ISPs were in their state. No idea. They've never met them. They've never talked to them. That makes it very hard for the state broadband offices there to do anything, because now they have to learn who they are. And you really get to know companies after talking to them for many years. And in Maine, you've done that. And so you didn't hand them out a whole lot of money, but you had these $1 million a year grant programs, but it opened up the door to have those conversations. Again, there's not, maybe 10 states have had those kind of long-term grant programs. And so 40 states have never done anything like that. I think it's very important that also that you just have the organizations in place to do that sort of thing. When BEAD grants were announced, just less than half the states didn't even have a broadband department, a broadband committee, a broadband entity or anything. So they've had to go out and actually create the organizations that you already have in place from scratch very recently. Some of them are so recent that they still haven't even hired their director yet. So they're really behind the 8 ball. The fact that you started early means that you had a really good shot. You could hit the street running. The state also jumped right in on CARES funding and used some of that money to get broadband to students. I thought the way you went about that was interesting. Little pockets here, little pockets there, but that really made a difference to the households that got it. An awful lot of states were not prepared to do that at the state level, so they simply didn't use the CARES money that way. They used it somewhere else. So I think the most brilliant thing that's happened in the state was the decision to create the new authority rather than try to revamp the old authority. The issues of, because legislature has to act to do those sort of things, and it's really hard to retool an existing authority and not mess up one of the rules. Legislators know that if they got it 90% right, that would mean they got it 10% wrong. And so I think it was brilliant to say, let's just do one from scratch that looks the way that it ought to look, and over time we'll figure out, what to do having 2 authorities. But I think that no other state has done that. I've not seen that solution anywhere else. And I really thought that was brilliant. As a state, you've done a lot of homework. You think who does and doesn't have broadband. We'll talk a little bit about mapping where it's now down to the house level, but you already had a pretty good feel for it. And so again, a lot of states had never looked at that issue, had never done any examination of broadband, had no idea. If they don't know who the ISPs are, they certainly don't know where they're at. And so you already had a leg up on that. And so I think that really puts you into a good position as this stuff started moving forward. I think it was really important that the state decided to administer the first NTIA grant that came through. That gave you some real practice of working through federal grants, which are very different than doing your own grants. And so I think that your folks have probably learned a lot. Quite honestly, what I would describe as a gruesome paperwork process. And so they've now got their feet wet in this gruesome paperwork process that comes along with federal money. There's not been a whole lot of that over the years. And so this is really the first time in over a decade that there's been really much of any such money that the state could have gotten involved in. So I think doing that was actually a pretty good idea. Obviously the current thing going on, which is extremely important, is that you develop the newest state $70 million grant. I'm sure everyone here is dying to find out who won those, but it's a really good down payment on starting to get areas served. And the beauty of doing that with state money is, you'll probably have some of those projects even possibly under construction next year. When you do it with your own state money, you can really get going and make this work. Certainly, if not next year, most of it will be built the following year. And that's really important because, the federal government came out of, back when the BEAD grants were announced and told the whole world we're going to solve rural broadband. And quite honestly, if I'm a parent at home in a rural area and I've got an 8th grader, and now I find out that my kid might graduate before the broadband gets to my house, I'm really going to be upset by that. And the fact is, in a lot of places, that's what we're still looking at today. This process is crawling along, and the fact that the state grants really, at least for some folks, are going to speed that up tremendously. So it's really wonderful to see the state do that. Again, that's the one item that doesn't put you at the top of the list, because states like Virginia and North Carolina and a few others have decided to go whole hog and really funded broadband. And so they may not even hardly need any of the BEAD money. So that we'll have to see how that all works out. Again, I think it's really important that the state filed for a middle mile grant. We all know that getting the broadband back to the deep corners of every state is a problem. And with your geography and most of the folks, living along the coast, to get to those outer areas is always a real challenge. If without these new fiber routes, the broadband out there is so expensive that an ISP might have a hard time making it work, even if they want to. And so I think hopefully you win that grant. You certainly have a good story to tell. That grant program will probably go to states that have their act together. And I think that probably gives you a good leg up towards doing it. They're going to look at you and go, these guys will use it wisely. So, there's no telling until it comes out, but I think that you should be in a good position for that, for the way that you put it together. You also did something that's really unique, and that you had the $12 million Connectivity Hub grant program. There's very few states doing that. I think I can easily count that on one hand who have even ever discussed connectivity hubs. Connectivity hubs are places where ISPs get together, they can swap traffic. It really saves a ton of money for ISPs because they can interconnect directly with each other. A ton of their traffic doesn't have to go to the open internet and pay for it. It also doesn't have to leave the state and come back again. So it speeds up latency and the speed of broadband. And so that's something that Maine has had in place and has been working with for a number of years, which is also, again, that's pretty unique. And now you want to strengthen that process. So I think that's just a really, really smart thing to do. Again, it's one of those things that benefits ISPs that nobody really talks about very much. In most states, to the extent that happens, they all fund it and do it themselves. And when you do, and that just makes it hard because a lot of times nobody steps up to be the first one to take a stab at it. So obviously you had the big announcement today. So it was easy for me to say that now since you've actually now gotten it. So, but you're going to get the digital equity and the BEAD planning grant. That money is going to really help to get some of this other stuff we're going to be talking about going. So obviously,
The irony. Did we just lose Doug? Yeah. Folks, while Doug tries to reconnect, I'll just mention, first of all, that Metro Fiber Map and Tilson were the two companies that I forgot. I'm sorry for them. I hope they're not watching. But if they are, I am sorry. And if you have a question on the line, you can post it in the chat. We'll ask them at the end, but there'll be time for questions. And if you have a question in the room at the end, we'll ask you either to come up or relay it to Clara and we can ask it directly through the mic. Hoping that we get that back though. And we will, when we do, we will ask him what his connection is. We'll be very interested to hear the response.
Oh, I was thinking in the meantime, maybe I would plug, I hope everyone can hear me. I would plug the Let's Talk Broadband call. That's going to be happening at 3:30. Doug Dawson will be there for that as well, assuming that Doug's internet is not completely gone. For more Q&A stuff, along with a conversation via myself and Brian Allenby at the Maine Connectivity Authority and some other folks from the Maine Connectivity Authority, I think. might be showing up. In addition to hearing community updates, getting a chance to chat with everybody. We won't be in a webinar format, we'll be in a meeting format, which will allow us to really open it up and make space for everybody to chime in and have MCA, NBC, Doug Dawson, kind of appraise of everything that's going on in your neck of the woods. So I look forward to seeing everyone there. Again, that'll be at 3:30. There will be a bit of a gap in between the end of this keynote and the beginning of that, but I'll make sure that everybody has the links probably before the end of this call. I'll drop it in the chat to make sure that everybody here has that so they can join us at 3:30. And in the meantime, we wait for Doug.
We do have one question from the chat that Andrew Butcher from MCA is going to answer. And I do have a couple of other questions that can be answered by people in this room. So I'm going to bring them to those folks. Go ahead. Great.
Thanks. Thank you, Miles. Hi, everyone, both online and in the room. So a question that was submitted was, has Maine received its deed and digital equity planning grants yet? It's a very—
Hey, folks, I'm back. So
thank goodness. I didn't know how to answer that. Good to see you.
Sorry about that. I don't know what happened, but boy, I was cut off completely, dead as a doornail. This is why we need better broadband.
You who your provider is.
Oh, I'll be glad to tell you it's Charter. Yes.
It's Charter.
I don't know.
Go ahead, Doug.
I don't know which end that was at, but that was not good, was it? Yes, I need a second here because I had to. So give me a second here. Okay. Where I left off was, let me just look where I left off here. Okay. So I was talking about the fact that you just had your announcement today. So, there's a lot of steps that are underway that are also very important to get to the future. And so one is you're already started work on the FCC mapping challenge. That's a 2-part challenge that's both looking at where the houses are on the map, but every state that's looked at has found a whole lot of locations that are not there. And it's important that we know they're there because, if they're not counted, you're not going to get money to get them funded. So that's a very important process. I don't believe there's also a challenge for where the ISPs are located, even though they're letting you make those challenges now. I don't believe they're processing those yet. But in the future, before the big grants are given out, I think that's going to be a very important set of challenges. So gathering that data and starting that process of complaining about ISPs that are not really there and don't really have the speeds are important. So, you've done your 5-year broadband equity action plan, or at least you're working on it. I'm not a giant fan of 5-year plans in themselves because we all know that after about a year, they go on the shelf. However, in this environment with all the million things going on, that makes you focus so that you don't miss anything. So the very fact of having to put that all down in writing means that you've really thought through everything broadband related. And I think that's going to pay dividends. I really would be shocked if 3 years from now anybody's going, well, hey, that's in the plan. That doesn't usually work that way. But the actual act of putting it together is a really healthy exercise. So probably the most important thing on the list that just doesn't get talked about enough is the Digital Equity Task Force. We can build all the broadband in the world, but we got to get folks on these networks. And so that's what that task force is planned as need to do. Get people with computers in their home, get them trained. We know how that works, but we sat around for 20 years complaining about the digital divide, and almost nobody solved it because we never threw any money at it. The way you do it is one-on-one with folks. I used to own a telephone company in Mississippi, a little town of 200 people. And 20 years ago, we built a data center and put computers in there, invited everyone in town to use them for free. We had one-on-one tutoring sessions, and they all learned how to use computers, and they had never even thought that would be possible for them. And so we know how it works. It's just like, but all these years, there's been nobody sitting down one-on-one with people. the way people learn computers is to teach them the thing they most care about, whether that's looking for a job or looking for knitting patterns, it doesn't matter. Once they learn how to do the thing they love, they figure out how to do everything else. And so it's really glad nationwide to see that going, and you guys are working on that. So you really gotta, that's the one that really needs a big push, to find the right partners, to find those people who are willing to go down in the trench and sit with people and teach them how to use computers. It's really wonderful work. You're doing a digital asset inventory, always a good idea. What the heck do we have in the state? I think that that's really important right now. You just mentioned at the beginning of my talk that part of this funding today is really going to help your regional broadband partners. So that whole regional planning is the way to go. There is no one size fits all. Even in a state like Maine, every part of the state has their own concerns. So let's help each of them do their own sort of solution here. There's work underway for the development of a fiber training certification program. That's workforce development. It can be grant funded. It's really wonderful to do. Somebody's got to build all these networks and take care of them after they're built. And so it's really great to see that you're going to look to use this one-time opportunity to help folks get better paying jobs that are badly needed in the industry. You've also got a lot of stuff. I won't go through the whole list, but like there's a wireless pilot project. There's a whole lot of little things that these groups are collectively doing to keep looking for broadband solutions. As much as we want fiber everywhere, there's some houses where it just is never going to make sense to bring fiber. And we're kidding ourselves to say that that's going to happen. And so it's really good to make sure that everybody gets something pretty decent. So now with all that said, and there's still a heck of a lot of work left to be done. So, but up to now, when I make that list of all the things you've done, again, you're like number 5 in the country. You would not believe how many other states haven't done half of the things on that list. And so you're sitting here today going, but gee, we still have so far to go, but you're way closer to that finish line than all these other states. Again, there's at least a dozen states who've done literally almost nothing yet. I mean, so just picture that the state had never done anything in the past and where you would be sitting today. So, part of the good thing that I think came of the next steps is these early steps you take got a lot of people educated about how broadband works. And those people are now moving over into the roles of finding new solutions. And so you're getting some really good folks who already know the industry walking in to help solve these problems in all these various committees and groups and stuff. And so again, that doesn't happen a whole lot in other states in the past because they haven't had that pre-work that has been going on here. And I think those folks are going to help carry you to the finish line here. There's still so much to find out about BEAD grants. I mean, BEAD grants, quite honestly, are going to be the most frustrating thing that we've ever had to do. If we would compare the BEAD grants coming up to what you just did with your $70 million project, the BEAD grant's going to be 5 or 6 or 7 times more complicated. It didn't have to be that complicated. And one of the steps I'm going to talk about is maybe ways to help you make it so it isn't so complicated. But for various reasons that I think I have a blog coming on Monday that's going to give my opinion on why I think that is. But it's not going to be easy. The last step of the funding is going to be hard, and it's going to take a lot of work to get your ISPs through that BEAD grant program. And so the other thing that I mentioned earlier was, and this is the one I really hate to mention, but we got to somehow get the word out to the public that solutions are not coming tomorrow. We're probably not going to see any BEAD construction until 2025, in my opinion. And then they have 3 or 4 more years to build the networks. And so it's going to be quite a while till some folks get a solution, even though it's coming. Again, you tell me it's coming and tell me it's 4.5 years from now. And I'm not really pleased about that. So, my biggest fear is that, the BEAD grants are so complicated that some of the really high quality ISPs in your state are just going to decide that it's too complicated for them, or that they won't qualify for it. There's some steps in the BEAD grant programs that the BEAD grant rules were quite clearly written to benefit larger companies, and even at the Congress level. And then I believe, even though I don't believe it was intentional, the NTIA has interpreted every single rule conservatively. Their motivation is not to make any big mistakes. They don't want to, they look at the FCC and the RDOF program and they gave money to some horrendously unqualified companies, and they don't want to be blamed for that. And so that's the reason they got this program in the first place, was the FCC was never, or the Congress was never going to give it to the FCC after that disaster. And so now I think that, they're going, I hate to say that, but they're working a little bit out of fear of failure. And so they're going to be cautious, and you can see that in the rules. Let's make sure each one of these 50 rules is ironclad so that somebody who doesn't qualify gets through. And on any given rule, that's defensible. But when you add up 50 of those, that just means conservative to the point where it becomes really problematical about whether you can even get it done. And to give an example, Congress had mentioned that there should be some irrevocable letters of credit, which is something that had been in the second half of the FCC RDOF process. And that's now been beefed up to be a really significant, serious set of letter of credit. There's one letter of credit that has to come early on just to apply for the grant, a second letter of credit that has to be put in place for many years as you build the network. Those are really expensive for ISPs. Some ISPs will simply never qualify for them. And so, I mean, I already have several ISP clients who are simply not even going to try the BEAD process because they know for a fact that they can't get those. Those were possibly doable when the rules came out, when interest rates were 3 to 4%. Now that we're looking at 6, 7, 8% interest rates potentially for BEAD grants, that's going to eliminate a whole lot of other folks that simply can't afford to put those things up. The way those work is you literally tie up the bank's money as they guarantee you that you're going to get the money and you have to pay interest on it. And so that's just one of many rules that are that are problematical. And the good news is I think that the states can provide some feedback to the NTIA. And in fact, the folks who are here on the call today, it's who really we need to sort of lobby here. So the NTIA fully expects states to push back on their rules. Again, there were ironclad rules established by Congress. Then there are the NTIA interpretations of those rules, and those are subjective. They're not cast in iron. And then there's a few new things they introduced that weren't in the Congressional Act. So I think that you can push back very clearly on their interpretation of the FCC rule or the congressional rules, and also on the items that they sort of invented. And so I think that that's probably the next big step between now and late spring. You're going to get an opportunity to give feedback on what's going to go in the state broadband plan. And so what you're going to want to do is to get everyone's opinion, and probably first most among those opinions are the ISPs, because if one of the ISPs that your community loves says, I'm not even going to file for this grant, we need to find out specifically why, and then see if we can't get the rules eased so that they will qualify for these grants. And so I think there's a chance to do that. That's going to take a little bit of courage by some of the folks here in the room who are the broadband grant office, because they've got to be willing to tackle the FCC on that. And the risk you take in doing that is it could even delay getting your money even longer while you negotiate these kind of changes. But I think that, and I'm not telling you to automatically do that, but I'm telling you to go do the homework to find out if you think that's important to do that. Because if it turns out that changing 4 or 5 or 6 rules can make a difference, then you want to take the time to do that, because that difference it might make a big difference to getting your solution. And so, and I can't tell you which of those issues it'll be, because they're very local, they're very specific to ISPs, but they will all have issues. And so, there's just a whole lot of unanswered questions about the BEAD grants. For example, we always keep hearing it's to solve unserved and underserved locations, but equally up on the same platform with those as anchor institutions. But none of us really know what that means, how I would go about asking, for example, for an anchor institution grant to go serve anchor institutions in a bunch of towns. That kind of layer of detail has not been worked out at all. Again, I mentioned the letters of credit. One of the odd things in there is they've really tried to make the ISPs tie down their contractors so that they know for sure that they're going to show up and build the networks. That's just not how the industry works. Contractors go with the next guy who's ready to hire his crews on Monday so that he can work. And so they're not going to go on hold for somebody for 2.5 years ahead of time for a grant. And so that's going to be a real problem of getting folks on the dotted line to say, I promise if this ISP gets the money that I will build his network, because it's a time uncertain. And I don't know any contractors except the real giant ones who would work under those conditions. And so that's going to be a real big problem. There's also just a ton of paperwork for the subcontractors, the builders. And whoever wrote that rule doesn't know fiber builders. They do not like paperwork. I mean, they just don't. And so they're going to struggle with that. They're really not going to do it. So whoever the ISPs are going to have to help them do it because they're like, I build fiber. I don't do that stuff. I mean, I can already tell you, I work with them all day long. There's another issue that's probably pushed back. The current rules go for what I call environmental heavy. It's a real full-blown environmental study. And for most cases, that's not needed. We're going to build most of these networks either on poles or in public right-of-ways that have already been dug up before. And we're simply not going to run into any environmental issues in those areas. We should push for rules and only invoke those big ones if I'm going to build a network that goes to some place that's never had it before, because then I can look at whether endangered species, and I can look about whether I'm going to dig up Indian burial grounds or whatever all those historical things. So you're never going to get out of it in federal money for those places, but we'd like to see them relax that in public right-of-ways. There's just no reason to go that way. State grants don't do that. You don't make people do full-blown environmental studies to build broadband, because it's like, hey, you're putting it on the pole. We're pretty sure poles are good right away. So the FCC maps I mentioned earlier, obviously keep pushing on that challenge. That's just a whole lot of work. I've looked over what you're doing, and you're on the right track there. But they gave us almost no time. That's due by mid-January. So it's a very complicated thing to figure out what you're going to want. I recommend that they change. There's Build America rules that we hope we'll get some relief on, and that takes talking to Congress. That's not something your broadband office or any of the state folks can have anything to do about. But anyone who's really worried about that needs to be talking to Congress people right now, because the Congress or the White House could excuse those rules for these grants. Nobody in this room and nobody in the industry thinks it's a bad idea to build American, except when I can't get American. I mean, this is still a very tight industry with the supply chains and all. And if I have to only do that, I could find myself coming to a screeching halt, because at the same time that we're building these grants, the big ISPs are building billions and billions and billions of dollars worth of broadband, and they have first preference of buying everything. If I'm a new ISP or a small ISP, I'm not going to get a preference over Verizon to build in Boston. It's just not going to happen. They're going to get first priority. So I'm going to need some flexibility on that. Maybe the biggest one that the state can push back on is the reporting requirements are so ghastly that they actually look like every 6 months, almost like doing another grant application. You have to tell them everything, every little detail. Most grants just say, show me that you really built what you promised you build, and I'll pay you on the invoices. This just goes into all the same detail of all these various little pieces of the grant application that you have to report on how you're doing. It's going to be a book every 6 months of how you're doing, and it's a huge time eater. And I don't know that anyone's going to ever really read it or care about it, but it's one of those requirements, and it just adds a lot of time and cost to doing this. One of the ones that are rule that's really troublesome is the NTIA says that if you're an ISP and you have a pretty good balance sheet, they don't want you to take any state or local matching grants. They want you to put the matching in out of your own pocket. And that's fine and dandy if that's what they want Consolidated to do, but I don't even mind if Consolidated gets some local grants. For a lot of ISPs, that even if it's only a 5% local match, that might make all the dollar difference in the world. So that's a rule that I think that you should push back on. Then there's just a long list, and I'm not even going to name them all because it's kind of nauseating, but there's a cybersecurity plan and a middle class affordability plan and things that we don't know what they are yet. And we're sitting there reading that going, they already have a low cost plan, which we all think is great to get broadband into low income houses. But then if there's a middle class affordability plan, that's everybody else. And your ISPs will be the first ones to tell you that we can't give everybody a discount or that businesses don't work. So, and they still have not told us what that is. And so it's a very interesting one because the federal rules and Congress rules said they cannot do any rate making in here. They can't force people to specific rates. So, but there's just all of these parts of the greed process of the BEAD process that make us all nervous. So, so the news there is, again, you need to start having these conversations with ISPs, with anyone else, the supply chain folks at the supply houses in your thing, the other consultants and engineers, find out which of these many, many issues, and I only read you a partial list, are things that people are finding to be massively troublesome. And then all of you collectively, or at least a whole lot of you, need to talk to your broadband office is going to be required to interview every stakeholder in the state that wants to talk to them. The congressional rules say go to every corner of the state. So they literally mean that. And so they're going to have to talk. Probably everyone in this room will have an opportunity to talk to them if you want, and all the folks online. But you can't just say, we want the grant to work. If you're going to talk to them and make any impact, you've got to have a specific list. It'd be really good if all the players got together ahead of time and made the same list. Here's the 6 things we'd love to see change. Or if 3 different people do that, at least, in different parts of the, because again, the small ISPs don't have the same concern as the large ones, so they'll have a different list. But it's good to have a list. You can't change 60 things, but you should stress to change 3 or 4 or 5 that really matter. So again, and then hopefully talk the broadband grant office here into actually going toe to toe with the NTIA and trying to get the rules relaxed. And the way they do that is they write their plan with those changes in it and then negotiate. So to circle back to the beginning, and I went a little fast there to make up my time because I know we want to ask questions. You are far ahead. I mean, you are, I think it's always good to know that you're much further ahead than almost all the other states I work with. And so you should all be congratulated on that. Most of the folks online have had some input to that. I mean, you're ahead because people are talking about broadband, they're thinking about broadband, and they're talking to each other about broadband. And you're way ahead because you've done that and no one else has done it. So I think the whole state really deserves a pat on the back collectively for getting as far as you are. But the bad side of that is there's still one heck of a lot of work done to get broadband to everybody. So we just have to, keep plugging along. And quite honestly, up to now, it's been kind of satisfactory, especially getting the $70 million grant program out there. Quite honestly, the rest of it's going to be a bit of a trudge and a drudge to get it done. And so, stay committed and just keep pushing to actually make this thing happen. So with that, I think we open up the floor to discussion, questions, and I'm also going to be around for your next session as we chat about topics as well. So.
Thank you, Doug. So as Doug said, he will be joining us for the next session, which will be a little bit more interactive. And if folks are joining from home, you'll have a chance to talk about your own story and get a little bit more personal feedback from Doug on your experience. We do have a couple of questions from the chat, which I'll ask here. If anybody in the room here wants to ask a question, you can come up to the mic and do that. Or you could submit them by paper to Clara, and I'll make sure that I can read them for you. So there were a couple of questions about the BEAD and digital equity grants. Anders started to answer those questions just before this session. The folks at home didn't see it, but folks from the NTIA came here in person to award Maine its $5 million early planning grant for the BEAD program. So we're very excited to get started on that. And we'll be talking a lot more about it tomorrow. But there were a bunch of questions about specifically on these high-cost areas, high-cost build areas, what can MCA and MBC and other organizations do in advance of deploying this BEAD funding to assist in how those high-cost areas can be built in Maine, where we have lots of rural areas, lots of forested areas. Are there areas so that there are areas that are not left to fixed wireless in the long term? Like, are there other solutions to that you've seen in other parts of the country?
That's a great question. And in fact, if I were the broadband grant office, I would put my emphasis there for these 70 million grants. You always have a choice when you hand out grants. Do I put these grants out to cover the most people? Or in this case, do I put them where they're most needed? And so that's a philosophical discussion that I'm sure the broadband grant office has been having. But here's a reason why you might want to go for the give this money to the rural folks. The BEAD high cost rules are a little bit scary. If you ask, the BEAD will automatically let you file up to a 75% grant. That sounds like a lot, but what I'm seeing and doing all the math, and I've worked on about 40 of these now in the last year, if your costs start going higher than about, pardon me, than about $10,000 a passing, then you're probably going to start somewhere around that number, 10 or 12. You're going to need more than a 75% grant to make it work. And a whole lot of the state's going to be in that category. A whole lot of the country is going to be in that category. And I think that the NTIA is going to be shocked at how many folks do not get by with a 75% grant. And so the problem with asking for more is the state broadband grant office then has the ability to instead look at alternates. In fact, to some degree, they're almost obligated possibly to do that, where they have to go out and look for a lower cost alternative so that they spread the grant money further. And so that puts those places in limbo. In fact, if I'm an ISP, that puts a real dilemma on me. Do I file for a 90% grant up front, or do I wait and to see if someone else files it and then try to come in when the state's looking for a second alternative? It's a very, the way those rules are written, it's almost like I call it a one round reverse auction. The person who asks for the least amount of money is going to win. And for these high cost areas, that's a really troublesome issue because it could turn out that the rules are almost going to force you to put in wireless where there might be somebody very willing to build fiber. So, that's an excellent question. And I personally would vote for giving the money on the $70 million to those places because now they're done. And so, those are taken off the table. The pockets that are closer to towns and stuff, that's, can be done with the other money. You should have enough money between the state and federal to get everyone done. That's the good news. We don't know that for a fact, but a lot of folks have estimated that. That's something that you won't really know till you see how much money you're getting, but let's just cross your fingers that it's enough. So that was a long answer, wasn't it?
It was a good one though. I have a related question. Based on what you know, both state funding and federal funding, is there enough money coming in these known grant programs to complete the job in Maine? And how close are we going to get?
That's the $1 billion question, isn't it? We don't know. We don't really know how much Maine's going to get. Once you know that, I suspect you folks at the broadband office could make a guess if that's going to be enough. There are other federal grants too. There's another round possibly too of Reconnect coming. There's possibly 2 or 3 other federal grant programs yet coming. So BEAD is not the only thing on the horizon. There's also some interesting economic development money available for economic development. There's also some interesting grant money that would be available for areas of particularly high economic need where the household incomes are extremely low. There's money, very much easier money available for tribal areas. And so, BEAD is not the only solution, but we got to get every dollar we can out of every one of those. I think you'll know that answer. Well, the big concern is we not know that answer for a long time. We need the maps to be good enough that they can give the money out. And if the maps don't get a whole lot better than they were last month, there's a good chance that some states will sue about the maps, and then we could be in limbo on this darn grant for the rest of our life. So, so there's still some real up in the air issues here. So.
And then follow up to that point you just made, Doug, actually, do you think the NTIA needs to give more time for states to participate in the FCC challenge process, or will that slow everything down?
Yeah, there's no absolute reason. That's one of the most important steps is how much money does Maine get, right? Yeah, it's not going to hurt them to give you 4 months. The next big step in your process is to get them your state broadband plan. I'm sure you're in the process of writing it now, but then you have to publish it and then you have to get all that public feedback on it. We have way more time during that process to get the dollars figured out, right? So they could easily slip that time, and they're being lobbied by everybody to do that. They better say soon because it's due in 5 weeks. So that was definitely not enough time. Even if you're completely ready for that challenge, it's a very complicated challenge to say, this building's not really here and you miss this building, and to do that very specifically for all the places where it's wrong. So, I would hope they give you a couple more months.
Changing gears a little bit, could you talk a little bit about broadband utility districts, municipally owned particularly, or owned by a group of communities? Came up in the chat.
In terms of BEAD money or just in general?
Yeah, the question didn't specify.
Okay. Well, first off, I represent 700 communities. So I've helped all sorts of communities either build their own network, and or the real common thing that we're doing is helping those communities partner with those ISPs so that they do have a solution. And so, you have to first decide which of those two paths you want to take. And the key here, if it turns out there's not enough money, the key thing that I'm sure the state's already working on is to have a very active grant map to say, here's what's left to be served. And every time somebody wants to serve an area, we cross that off so we can keep figuring out how to get to the rest of it, right? So any communities that find that partner are going to move up on the chart as far as being ready to know for a fact that somebody's going to ask for a solution there. And so we're also finding in some communities that there are ISPs willing to tackle parts of it without a grant. And so you have to have those conversations, even if they only tackle a fourth of your community without a grant, that piece is taken care of and we don't have to wait for it. So yes, having those conversations, the sooner the better, is important. So if a community wants to do it on its own, BEAD is not going to be government friendly. Governments can't get lines. There's just a number of rules in here. The federal rules say it's open to everybody, but it's not. So, it's going to be very hard for a community to get the BEAD grants. You don't have a track record as an ISP. You can't get the letters of credit. There's 4 or 5 other things that you don't exactly fit the mold right on. Now, the good news there is the state broadband office hopefully has enough latitude to say, that's all right. That's the guys we want anyway. But an actual government ISP will have a bigger uphill battle with the big grants than a regular commercial ISP. Not to say that it's not doable, but it's one more complexity that in an already massively complex process, that's just one more that sort of makes my head spin. So,
something related to that, do you expect states to end up negotiating with ISPs to limit grant sizes in places where there is no competition?
There is an actual negotiation process in the BEAD, but it goes back to those high cost areas. So ISPs are going to file the areas that they want to serve, right? And for those, the state broadband office has to say yay or nay. Particularly where it's going to get complicated is when those areas crisscross each other like crazy. So if I give the money to ISPA, that crossed 3 other pieces of grants by other people. Do they still want the grant with what's left if I decide to give it to them? So there's going to be this whole checkerboard thing of figuring out who gets what money. But the place where the NTIA can negotiate, and in fact, you're required to, is if there's parts of the state where nobody asked for the money. I don't believe you're going to be allowed to negotiate on the grants that are filed. They file and ask what they want and you say yes or no. But you can't come back and say, you want to cut that area back. I don't see that in the rules, but that doesn't mean you couldn't write it in your version of the rules, at least to try to that. Right now, it's just sort of moot on that point, but the state is absolutely obligated to try to go out and fill in the rest of the holes. And they can do that. First, they have to do an RFP to see who else will be interested in those other places. And then if that doesn't work, they can go directly with somebody and just make a deal. But I don't believe they're going to be able. This is not like a state grant where state grants, you can probably have a lot of freedom to discuss about what you want to see happen, but I don't think you're going to have that here. This is very open and transparent. And And if you deviate from what they filed, you're probably going to be subject to lawsuits. I hate to say it. So.
Changing gears again, how can ISPs help with the digital literacy issue that you described to help get more people to adopt our services, to get them online? What have you seen from ISPs and other places in the country?
I'm going to be honest with you. That's not the ISP's job. ISPs build and operate networks. You know, they're the ones who have to get people signed up for the ACP and the Lifeline program. So that piece of it is theirs. But somebody probably has to go out and stir up folks to even get them to ask to be part of those programs. ISPs are not the one to give computers in homes and teach people how to use them. They're busy running networks. That's going to have to be done by somebody else. You may have an ISP or two decide to join that effort. So if they do, that's awesome. But that's not something I would expect out of an ISPs. In fact, if they're off building these networks, I don't really want to deflect their attention from doing that part of it. So I don't see very many ISPs even slightly interested in doing that. They're going like, that's not me. I mean, I've asked a bunch of them. They're like, heck no, I'm not doing that. So that's normally going to be done with a state agency, with people like the libraries, nonprofits. I mean, there's all sorts of potential entities who could take that role and run with it, but it's not likely going to be the ISPs. So.
We have one last question. You said that Maine is in the top 5 of states. Thank you. That's exciting.
Well, I said around 5.
Around 5. I heard 5, Doug. And this webinar has been recorded, so we can go back and check.
We can go back and check what I said.
The question though is, what are the attributes of what will be the best, the number 1, 5 years from now?
I believe the states who decided up front to put in so much money, and the 2 that come to mind are Virginia and North Carolina, and they're not the only 2, or have put in so much money that they're almost going to solve the digital, they're almost going to fund all of this before we even get to the BEAD process. They're going to have their networks built 2 or 3 years earlier than everybody else. Now, with that said, there's a giant difference between North Carolina and Virginia. Virginia looks very much more like what you're doing. They're working with a whole large coalition of electric co-ops and small ISPs and the incumbents. North Carolina is very heavily weighted towards the incumbents. It may turn out that when it's all said and done, that was not a good idea. So the winner is going to be the one who have networks by ISPs who are responsible and do what they're supposed to do. Now, all you got to do is go do that. So it's complicated. So.
Well, thank you, Doug, for joining us. One more time, a round of applause for Doug in the room. Maybe you can hear it.
Right. Well, I'll be around for the rest of the day here. So all right. Very good. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, Doug. So Doug will be joining us online at Let's Talk Broadband. You will have received an invitation to that event. It should be hosted by my colleague, Joe Oliver from the Maine Broadband Coalition. Tomorrow, we will have online sessions for those of you at home. For those of you who join us at lovely Thomas College, we'll be starting at 9 o'clock. Please get here a little bit early so you can get in and get your coffee and get your snacks. They do not allow coffee in the auditorium, I'm told. So if you want coffee, it will be policed very tightly. So we hope to see a lot of you tomorrow, and thank you again.
Thank you.